In today's Warzone 2 video, I'm giving you guys my best controller settings. Your controller settings are incredibly important and can really drastically affect the way your game plays. If you go and enjoy the video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe with notifications turned on, and let's hop into this. Alright, so let's get into these controller settings here and give you guys all that stuff. We'll get into some other settings here afterwards that don't necessarily have to do with the controller directly, but they're still pretty effective on your actually changing them, so we'll get into that afterwards. But first things first, we have our controller as our aiming input device. Button layout is just kind of standard for Warzone. I haven't really changed that here personally. Bumper ping, I don't really need that on. I don't find that beneficial. And then something I do find beneficial is actually flipping my L2 R2 to my L1 R1, aka using my aim and my shooting buttons as my top bumpers instead of the bottom triggers. Sometimes having that press in time can be a little bit of the determining factor in winning a gunfight versus not, because maybe it takes a little bit longer for your controller to register that full push in. If you don't happen to have like a scuff controller or something that has trigger stops on that shortens that time up, it can be a little bit detrimental to have them as your bottom ones. Just something to kind of think about. If you're completely used to it, you don't have to change it, but it is something that I do, considering I played on PlayStation my entire life, including PlayStation 3, and it was always the top bumpers for aiming and shooting kind of anyway, so I've been used to that for a long time. The stick layout is on default. My controller orientation is up. Controller vibration, you can keep this on or off. I've just had it on for like the entirety of every time I've ever played, so it just feels natural for me. It's not like it's going to throw off your aim or make your aim better if you don't have it on. My trigger effect is on off because you do not need to have any of this haptic related stuff. You don't need any of this feedback. Just keep it entirely on off. It is not beneficial in any capacity. My horizontal and vertical stick sensitivity is on a 6.6. I believe this ends up allowing me to have enough movement capability to be able to look around and move fast enough without also making me go off target when I do actually like to aim in and be able to track some targets. I find if you play on too high of a sensitivity, like for instance, I used to play on like an 8.8, and I just felt like I was moving back and forth across targets a little too easily. I was starting to miss some shots, so I definitely lowered it down. And some of the best players play on a lower sensitivity, and that's for good reason. So if you feel like you're missing some shots, lower your sensitivity. Higher sensitivity does not always mean it is better. My ADS sensitivity multiplier is also on a 0.8, so that pretty much takes it from that value of the 6.6 sensitivity and actually lowers it down even more. Some runs are about the 4 or 5-ish range, and as soon as I ADS, pretty much making it harder for me to even then get off the target. And along with the aim assist, it's very beneficial to move your ADS sensitivity multiplier down at least to like 0.9 or something else like that, and you can even adjust it from there on out. But otherwise, I believe it's nice to move it down from that 1.0, which I believe is stuck at baseline, to this. My sensitivity multiplier here, I just have everything on a 1.0. I don't believe it's necessary to change this. I just kind of leave everything as is. I don't really care. The vertical aim axis, this is all just on standard right here. I don't need to change this at all. And then let's get on down here to the gameplay section. So my aim down sight behavior is of course on hold. That is definitely something you guys should be having. You don't ever want to have this on toggle or anything else like that. Like, you don't want it on toggle, just keep it on hold. Your change zoom shared input, so this is just on sprint / tactical sprint focus. I pretty much just always keep it on this. I don't really think it needs to be on melee. I would just say that you guys should just keep it on this for the time being. My automatic sprint is going to be selected to the automatic tac sprint option. If you're especially on controller, which is I'm assuming the reason you're watching this video, having automatic tac sprint is hugely beneficial, just because you're not constantly pressing in that joystick, and that definitely does cause stick drift over time. That's why your controller will be perfectly fine otherwise, but then you set it down, all of a sudden your character starts looking off to the side one way. That's when you get that stick drift, and also due to dead zones and stuff like that. But ultimately, you will cause stick drift to happen a lot faster by having automatic tac sprint off. But it can come in handy if you're running like a shotgun or something, to maybe not have automatic tac sprint if you're not a really good player and you don't know to actually pull your stick back for a second. If you're just more of a novice player or someone that hasn't played a lot, maybe having it on just automatic sprint or off and having to actually click it in every time may be more beneficial for you. But for me, I think automatic tac sprint works the best. Let's get on down here a little bit farther. So our equipment behavior is just on hold. I believe that's just the way to go. Weapon mount activation, ADS plus melee. That's just like my L1 plus like my circle or whatever it is. I don't really ever weapon mount, honestly, like hardly ever. And it'll show up on screen for you pretty much anyways whenever you have the option to mount. Your interact / reload behavior, so mine is on prioritize interact. So this is pretty big. You do not ever want this to be on tap to reload. Tap to reload is great for multiplayer. That's what you should have it on for multiplayer. But unless you're going to be like, you know, playing it like it's multiplayer and you don't actually mind, you know, sitting there and holding square or holding X, whatever button you got on your controller to be able to pick something up, that can be very detrimental, especially when you drop in, you know, you drop in, let's say, top of Sheikah Tower, and there's guns on the floor, and you just want to be able to tap the button to be able to pick something up as opposed to holding on it, because by then you potentially are getting torched out and you got to respawn in. So having it on prioritize interact allows you to obviously prioritize, you know, picking stuff up, but you also can tap to reload when there's not a whole bunch of stuff around you. So it's very, very beneficial. So I definitely recommend for you guys having it on prioritize interact or prioritize reload, depending what your preference is, but just keep off tap to reload and tap to interact. Not really good. And of course, my armor plate behavior is on apply to all. I believe that is beneficial. You hold down, like for instance, for me, it's triangle since I'm on PlayStation, and all of my plates will then recirculate into my vest, which is a good thing. Now let's get into some of the fun stuff here. The aim assist general category. So aim assist, got to keep that on. You always have to have aim assist on. I believe that's the way to go. Aim assist type, mine is on Black Ops. So I used to play it on just like the default. I would recommend staying away from precision or focusing. I don't believe those are really any bit necessary to use. But Black Ops, kind of from what I've heard and also kind of experienced a little bit, is that the aim assist seems to be a tad bit more like sticky, I want to say. So it can help you out a little bit more so than playing on default. So I've been playing on Black Ops for a while now, and I definitely say my accuracy is pretty damn good. So I'd recommend for you guys to try out Black Ops if you're staying on default, but pretty much move away from precision and focusing, as these really aren't that great as of right now. Your ADS aim assist has got to be on. Always have to have that on. My third person ADS correction type is just on assist. I don't really care because I don't really play third person hardly ever. It doesn't really affect me. And then my aiming, let's go down to my aim response curve type. This is pretty huge. So mine is on dynamic, because I believe that having that S curve just allows you to not overcorrect in any capacity, and it just allows you to be able to, you know, move fast when you need to be, but also slow you down so you don't like overcorrect and do something stupid. Linear is pretty good. I played on linear for a long time back when that was like the meta way to play, but I did move over to dynamic, and I've stayed on dynamic here for the past however many months. And I definitely believe that if you guys are playing on standard or linear, try out dynamic and you guys will be good to go. My ADS sensitivity multiplier here for the next one is on a 0.8. I wouldn't really exactly say to be able to alter this too much. If you're playing on a 1.0, keep it at a 1.0. It's not going to make that big of a difference. I don't even entirely have the greatest understanding of what this setting does. I've just kind of been messing around with it, so I'm not the expert on this particular setting. I just plan a 0.8. Just kind of want to put that out there. I don't want to like tell you guys to know something when I don't. This is just a setting that I have on 0.8, and I will mess around with it here a little bit in the future, but all the rest of my settings I know perfectly fine. But let's move on down here a little bit more. So your ADS sensitivity transition timing has got to be on instant. Your custom sensitivity per zoom, I just have that on off because I don't believe you need to have custom sensitivity per zoom. Granted, everybody, like for your horizontal and vertical, everybody's going to play on something different. It's not required to play, let's say, on my sensitivity of 6.6. But ultimately, I just believe that you should just keep it universal, and it makes your life so much easier. I just leave it on off, and I've never ever altered it, and I feel like I have a great shot no matter what gun I'm using or what scope I'm using. Granted, I don't use a lot of these super high zoom scopes, but I feel like I have a good shot otherwise. Next up, your input dead zone. So this is where a lot of people end up having trouble, especially when they're tuning their guns. That's because your left stick and right stick dead zone, if you lower these too much, that is when you're tuning, your slider will start moving on its own, or if you put your controller down, your character is going to start moving on its own in game. That's because you have too much stick drift, and that's what I was talking about with that automatic tag sprint, is that if you have that on, it, you know, helps save the life of your controller and make it, you know, actually last longer. So I just had this kind of on the default left stick and right stick zone. I haven't altered this too much. My right trigger and left trigger is of course on 0 because I don't want anything right there. I'm not going to be using those too much, but I just believe that, you know, if you start having stick drift or something like that, you know, maybe put these back to default. And if these already are on the default of like 0.15 and you still have stick drift, that's probably time to go get a new controller, just to be honest, because stick drift is not one of those things you can really come back from. My gyro behavior is just going to be on off. I don't feel like I need that. My gravity vector is on off. Pretty much all the stuff down here for the gyro aiming is not really going to be all that, you know, necessary. FOV sensitivity scaling, I just have that on just because, like, I don't know exactly what all that does, but it is in here, so I just say have that on. Now moving on down here, kind of below the gyro stuff, we're gonna get into the movement behaviors. So my sprint / tactical sprint behavior is just on toggle, and that's because auto move forward is on off. My tactical sprint behavior is going to be on double tap for when I choose to actually, you know, automatic tag sprint or double sprint. My ground mantle is on off. You definitely do not want that on, or your automatic airborne mantle or automatic ground mantle. That's going to cause you, when you run up to certain objects, if you potentially want to just like jump back, maybe you're trying to jump shot or something else like that, you will, you know, mantle onto the table next to you instead of actually just jumping, which is really super annoying. It's caused me a lot of deaths in previous Call of Duty titles, not this one because I've had it off, but it can be super annoying to automatically mantle something mid gunfight. So we don't want to do that. So I have all this stuff on off. As far as some of this other stuff down here goes, plunging underwater for movement, parachute auto deploys on, sprinting door bashes on, my ledge hanging mantle behavior is on mantle only, and then my combat behaviors, we'll get into this here real quick. So my ADS stick swap is off, backpack alternate controller is off, and then my weapon mount movement exit is on, and then my weapon mount exit delay is medium. Depleted ammo switch gun, that's just kind of useful to have in case you run out of ammo. It automatically switches you over to your next gun. Quick C4 detonation, I don't really have this on because I honestly never use C4 ever, but you guys can throw it on or off. It doesn't really matter too much. Now moving on from the controller settings into some stuff that's still incredibly beneficial. We're not going to get super in depth to all the settings, but we have to take a look at your FOV. I plan personally 120 FOV, and the larger your FOV is from that 80, which is default, up to 120, which is the maximum, the more you're going to be able to see. So ultimately, I believe personally, you guys should be playing on the maximum FOV to give you the most amount of peripheral vision around you. That's hugely beneficial to identifying what's going on around you, and it just ultimately looks better, in my opinion, to be able to have more of a wide field of view as opposed to being super zoomed in. Some people prefer that. They can't handle the 120. Maybe they play on like 110 or 100, but I believe if you can play on 120, you should definitely do it. Your ADS field of view should be unaffected, by the way. When you play unaffected instead of independent, what this allows you to do is that independent would then have you zoom into the 80 FOV as soon as you bring your gun up for ADS. And that's not a good thing to go from 120 out here to zooming in at 80 for your ADS, just because you lose so much of your peripheral vision, and also it just looks really weird to zoom in that much. And you also get the benefit of when you are still zoomed out to 120, when you look down your gun sight, you have less visual recoil, which can be pretty sick. It can allow you to almost kind of inadvertently control your gun better just because you have less visual recoil. Also, your weapon field of view should be on like wide. You want to be able to see the most around you as possible. We don't want to have this on like narrow. That makes your gun a lot bigger on your screen. We don't need it taking up more space than it already does. So keep that on wide. And then of course, some of this other stuff down here, you want to keep your first person camera movement to the least amount possible. If you have this on like default 100%, like, you know, if your screen starts shaking, it's going to be really shaken. So we don't want that. Also, another setting that's pretty huge is going to be some of your post-processing effects. Your depth of field, you want that off. Your world motion blur, you want that off. That just blurs everything around you. So in Warzone, I mean, how are you going to be able to pick people out of a distance when you're running if you have your motion blur on? It's just not going to be possible. And of course, weapon motion blur, that's not really that huge. I guess it's kind of a cool visual aesthetic, but you definitely don't need that on in any capacity. In your film grain, you want that 100% off, just because it is not useful. We don't need to make the game look more grainy. That just kind of distorts it. It makes it harder to pick people out. All right, so that's all my settings there. If you guys enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe, notifications turned on, and just remember to check out these other videos here on screen. Also, just shout out to Cap, don't be Randy, and I'm out. Peace.